Hello, I'm Innar Liiv from Tallinn University of Technology, and we are here today to have an interview with Francesco Mureddu from Lisbon Council.
Thank you very much. So the Lisbon Council, it's a think tank which was founded by Prof, our president, in 2003, following the Lisbon Declaration. And it's a think tank based in Brussels. We support the European Commission in several contracts, and we work in several projects, both consultancy and research projects. Our main topic is digital transformation of public administration. And lately, we are also working a lot in application of co-creation methodologies in public services in the view of basically restructuring the way in which public services are carried out, are designed, and in a way to involve more citizens in the design and delivery of public services.
So we are today at the Data for Policy conference. So
Yeah.
if you would describe this conference, so what would you say? How does it distinguish from others? What are those conversations that you would expect to be held here?
Yeah, well, it's my second time at Data for Policy conference. I came in Data for Policy 2015, and it's really the place to be if you are involved in data science. But if you're a person that work with data, it's really the place to be, because there are the most important experts, both from academics, from civil society like Stefan Verhulst that presented this morning. There are also very important experts from international organizations like Barbara Ubaldi. So it's difficult to name everybody, but it's really the place to be. And because in these days there will be a very important debate on, let's say, on the most hot topics, research topics and policy topics related to the use of data. So it's a pleasure for me to be here, and it's going to be very instructive for me to be here, and it's going to be very useful to get feedback on my own research, my own roadmap on the use of big data for policy making.
So you mentioned the digital transformation of governments. British policy documents have often emphasized that the digital transformation is mainly about three pillars. So one is improving the experience of citizens, second one is improving organizations, third one is boosting economy. Do you agree with that, or do you see some additional
For sure, UK has always been at the forefront of digital transformation. The government digital service, which was actually initiated by two colleagues of mine, Mike Bracken and Tom Loosemore, it's always been at the forefront. I really agree with what you said, and it's very important the UK experience because they basically applied a series of methodologies to involve the citizens and the companies in the creation of the services. So basically, they are really restructuring the services in UK. And it's one of the few examples of large-scale application of these methodologies and large-scale successful application of these methodologies. So also in Europe, mainland Europe, we have a lot of good examples, and the UK experience is very important for us as an example. Yeah, of course.
So a lot of governments are actually trying to get from their current position to being a digitally transformed government, and you have been currently involved with this project called Big Data Policy Roadmap. Can you perhaps explain a bit about the background of that?
Yes. So Big Policy Canvas is an Horizon 2020 project, which is funded by the European Commission, and is carried out by Atos Technology, by National Technical University of Athens, by Fraunhofer Focus, and by the Lisbon Council. So the idea of the project is to develop a knowledge base on related to the needs and the tools that can be used by public administration. And one of the output, and especially the one that I am involved the most, is to define a roadmap of research challenges for the use of big data in policy making. So in my work, I'm basically looking at what is the status of technology or application of big data technology to policymaking, what are the research avenues in order to improve and increase the use of big data in policymaking, and what are, let's say, what are the recommendations that we can give to public administration in order to be able to use and to, let's say, gain the most from these technologies. And this topic is very related to what the conference is about. And actually is very related to, let's say, a higher level topic, which is the use of disruptive technologies in policymaking. It's one of the research avenues that we are now following at the Lisbon Council. As disruptive technologies, we mean, for instance, artificial intelligence, blockchain, high-performance computing. We mean, of course, big data. And we are basically trying to figure out which are the bottlenecks and which are the external framework conditions that hamper the full use of these technologies in policymaking in order to provide advice to the states, to the member states, but also to international organizations. And one of our activity in this sense is the support to the Estonian presidency in the elaboration of the ministerial declaration for e-government 2018. And as we can see, both the Malmo declaration and the Tallinn declaration are very focused on the concept of user centricity. So the idea is that user research and service design must be applied in the development of services, especially digital services, in order to provide the digital services that are really meeting the needs of citizens. So this is really a core pillar of digital transformation that we are seriously tackling at the moment.
And often people actually have identified that one of the barriers in those developments is that people basically that there's a divide between tech people and people from political science and social science backgrounds, and this is actually also the case in this conference. So how would you comment that? Do you have any like a special secrets how to make those two communities work together?
Well, I think that those two communities are working together more and more. The difference between the different fields, it's kind of getting more blurred at the moment. Myself, for instance, my background is in economics. I have a PhD in economics, but I've been working in technology-related topics for the last 10 years. So I think that, the different communities are working more and more. And this conference, it's actually a very good example of people from policy and people from technology that really interact and that really exchange information and knowledge. So I think that conferences like Data for Policy really help in this sense, because people will meet at the conference and will keep interacting and exchanging information and writing also together, working also together afterwards. So.
And perhaps one of the main things, or something that has been often brought up, what is also being like a barrier for those digital transformation is actually the policy makers being afraid of different scandals related to opening the data, for example, or the topics regarding the de-anonymization. Last, I think 2 years ago here at the Data for Policy conference, there was a presentation about how to say the symmetry of anonymization and usefulness. So what would you actually recommend to the politicians and policymakers who are afraid in this re-identification and de-anonymization problems?
Yeah, for sure, data privacy is of paramount importance. Also, transparency in policymaking is very important. One of the topics that are really hot at the moment is the use of algorithms that can take decisions that are very important for the life of people. So it would be really fair that these algorithms are open and that people understand how these algorithms are created and how they are used. In this sense, regulations like GDPR help a lot because they really require a high degree of openness, and it would be good that all countries and also countries outside the European Union would really take into consideration GDPR regulation as a benchmark, and this would really lower the level of of fear that policymakers and that citizens are experiencing at the moment. But for sure, it's a very hot topic. It's also a hot topic the fact that digital transformation is not only using technologies in policymaking, but it's really changing the way in which public services are developed. So there is a huge deal of restructuring in the organization, of organizational change, of mentality change, because public administrations normally in most of the countries are very conservative. And if you look at countries like Italy or Greece, the average level, the average age of public servants is quite high. So it's very important to introduce elements of innovation and elements of organizational changes in the public administration, even before starting to adopt new technologies.
And of course, there's the term co-creation. So obviously, as you mentioned, the innovation needs great ideas, and you will get the great ideas from the people who are using the system. So, but what would you say about the current status of the co-creation research? Is it just like another hype word, or is it a silver bullet to solve?
Well, to find silver bullets is always very difficult. In my career, I've heard many words that were the hype, and then the hype a little bit. The hype, I mean, was not really in the facts. But co-creation is really mature at the moment. I presented a paper last week with the Lisbon Council in which we presented some methodologies, co-creation methodologies, and some cases that are used in the public administration within the scope of a project called COVAL, which is the other Horizon 2020 project in which I'm working. And co-creation is very mature because we have many methodologies that are standardized and that are, and we have a lot of cases of application. So we have, for instance, the UK government digital service that has also a lot of toolkits that are freely available. We have cases in like the Danish Mind Lab, which was a living lab inside public administration, and we have a lot of cases in mainland Europe, especially about living labs at municipal level, like for instance the Torino City Lab in the city of Turin, Italy. So co-creation is mature, but what we need now is to boost the co-creation in order to move from single cases to a large-scale practice at European level. In this way, co-creation would really be the norm instead of something that is just a case-by-case element. And in order to scale co-creation and to move and to push co-creation to be the norm, there are a set of policy recommendations that we give as Lisbon Council. One possible recommendation is for you to use public funding to boost co-creation. So basically to have funding of new services conditional to the use of co-creation methodologies. Or what we also advise is to change the practices for recruiting new personnel in public administration, because co-creation The use of co-creation in public administration requires a lot of skills like prototyping, ethnography skills. So there is the need to recruit new personnel, and obviously recruitment in public administration is always very difficult. Only the digital teams in the different countries are extraordinary power for recruitment, but we need to make these digital teams the norm. And other possible two elements. One is monitoring. We need to provide an evidence base for co-creation. We need to show that co-creation works. We need to show that the level of adoption of co-creation and the level of adoption of digital services, and we need to make this data open. And finally, openness of data and services. Co-creation is possible only if data are really open and services are open and reusable. Otherwise, co-creation, especially in the digital realm, is very difficult. And last, linking to the UK experience, we need to have co-creation as an infrastructural service. So while now, at the moment, in the different countries, infrastructural services are in particular technology services, like for instance a service for e-payment, services for electronic delivery, service for electronic identity. We need to have co-creation and especially service design, which are infrastructural services. So we need to provide teams in the different countries that are able to support local administration that do not have the capabilities in applying co-creation and in particular service design methodologies to the development of new services.
But how do you imagine 5 or 10 years in the future of co-creation? So one way is to develop completely new systems or new services. Another way is to basically rethink how public sector works. But do you actually already see some pilots or projects where the actual data of citizens is used as a way of co-creation? So essentially that the digital footprints, what people are leaving in the systems, are the co-creation of new systems.
There are several examples in which the data of the citizens are no longer moved inside public administration, but there are systems of interoperability that help migrate the information inside the public administration. An example is the X-Road that is adopted in Estonia, that is based on a blockchain system that helps in moving data and information from one agency to the other. In some other countries, there are examples of interoperability between public administration at the central level and at the local level. For instance, in Italy, there is the development of what is called the DAF, a Digital Analytic Framework, which is a set of technologies and of rules that help to increase the interoperability between the data sets that are owned by the municipalities and the data sets that are owned by the central government. So yes, there are already some examples of new services that are created based on the data that are existing and that are basically made interoperable.
And it's interesting that you brought out the integration of different data sources, because UN Global Pulse has I think a few years ago presented what they call taxonomy for big data, for novel big data sources.
Yeah.
And from that text, I would actually be really curious to listen your opinion about what is more important. Whether do you see that it's more important the analytical aspect or the analytics aspect in big data, or the focus should be in novel big data sources? So basically, not the analytics aspect, but the integration of different data sets. So which one of those two, although both are really important, and which one should public sector start to use first, to integrate different data sources, or to analyze and find insights from their current ones?
Well, that's a very interesting question. In a big policy canvas, in the roadmap that I'm writing, I basically take all the different phases of the big data chain. From one side, yes, it's very important to develop new technologies for data extractions, especially data extractions from networks, from social media, or from IoT. But it's also very important to develop new technologies for data integration, for sure, because once you extract the data, you need to integrate them to create data lakes that then are usable. But obviously, if you don't have an infrastructure for data analytics and for modeling, what are you going to do with the data? You just have data that do not have any value. So the possible step forward is to develop models that are basically extracted from the data, that are based on the data, but models that can be used for simulations, for scenario forecast, and models that are usable also by non-specialists. In this way, for instance, policymakers will be able to use this model to experiment on forecast, experiment on different scenario, and visualize the effect of the results of this scenario. So it's all the big data chain that is important in this sense. But what is also underlying all these mechanisms, all this process, are the challenges related to transparency and privacy, data ownership, which we cannot forget because they are very important. They really have a huge impact on trust by citizens. So yes, integrating data sources, extracting new data from new data sources like web scraping, web crawling is important. It's important to integrate these data sources, but it's also important to make available to public administrations infrastructures for data analysis, models that can be reusable. In this sense, for instance, the European Commission is developing the CEF BDTI, Big Data Test Infrastructure, which will be also presented here in the conference, I think tomorrow or on Wednesday. And basically, they are providing an infrastructure that can be used by administrations, public administrations, both at local level, medium level, or a national level, in order to run data analytics on their big data, on the big data that they provide. And what is also very interesting is that they are making the model for for carrying out analytics available, so that public administration will be able to take this model, so download basically software, and they will be able also to reuse this model for the analysis that they want to carry out.
And you mentioned data ownership. So the Vice President Andrus Ansip just quite recently mentioned that this will probably be the topic which will have to be solved by next people. What's your take on all the complexities and nuances and details of data ownership?
Data ownership, it's an extremely complex and it's an extremely complex topic. GDPR helps in this sense, in that, in principle, it helps people to keep the ownership of their data. But it's not very clear what are the boundaries of the data ownership. For instance, if we take into account, probably it was your example, basically the decoding of the DNA of part of the population in Estonia. So from this point of view, it's very difficult to say who owns this data. the company that did the coding, the person that has the DNA, or the ancestors, or the children and grandchildren. So it's very difficult. It's a very difficult topic. On the other hand, it's also difficult to understand. If we take a data market a data market point of view, it's also very difficult to say who is the owner of the value added to the data, because some people say that data is the new oil, but actually data is the new oil only if you do something with this data, and only if these data are organized in order to provide information. So only if there are services, there are metadata, so the data have a meaning, the data have a purpose. Otherwise, they are just raw data that do not have much value. So it's also difficult to understand to what extent the data have a value, and to what extent the value of the data can be attributed, and to who can be attributed.
Now, having the experience from Lisbon Council and being around topics and conferences like today's, what would be your recommendation for graduate students for their next research topics? So what would you currently say that what would be the main topics that would be really challenging?
Well, obviously, the main topics that we see really challenging in the future are artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence for sure, both in the private and in the public sector. In the public sector, voice-first services is going to be a very important topic, but also fraud detection is also a topic very important in artificial intelligence. But also other topics like the integration of blockchain and Internet of Things. This is also a very hot topic, what is called the blockchain of things. In fact, blockchain it's a perfect example of a technology that can be integrated in order to ensure the security of Internet of Things networks and Internet of Things data. So I would say that those two topics are the most are the hottest, let's say, in the next 5 to 10 years. If I have to have a wild guess about the next 30 years, I would say quantum computing. Quantum computing is becoming a reality, but the applications are a little bit far-fetched at the moment. But let's say in the next couple of decades, or 3 decades, it's going to be a reality, and it's going to be applied, and it's going to have a massive influence on our lives.
Thank you for this interview, Francesco.
Thank you.